Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm doing another hypothetical 2028 presidential election prediction. This video I am looking at the former vice presidential nominee of Kamala Harris, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. The reason I'm doing this is I was going through the Wikipedia page for potential Democratic candidates for 2028 and Governor Tim Walz is one that is listed on this page. And of course we did see JD Vance and Tim Walz face off in the vice presidential debate. I believe that was back in October or September. My memory's a little foggy on which one, but they did face off in that debate. And I thought it'd be interesting to do an election matchup of these two. I also want to just quickly, before getting into the prediction itself, a lot of this is going to be my own personal, I would say, like projecting, because obviously 2028 is a long ways away. We don't know what the economy, the world is going to look like at that time, or what the Trump approval is going to be at that time. I will say the Trump approval right now, Trump is currently approved of more than disapproved of by 5.4%. So at this current moment in time, this is where Trump stands and his administration, which I think does bode well for JD Vance. So that is why I think some of my predictions may be justified based on what the current administration is viewed as by the rest of the country. As for Tim Walz versus JD Vance, right now it starts off with 125 electoral votes for JD Vance that are 100% safe. I think they're going to be over 15% margin of victory no matter what in 2028. Tim Walz starts off with about 120 electoral votes that I think are going to be safe over 15% no matter what as well. There are 293 electoral votes across all the states in gray that I do want to go a little bit more in depth on, so I'm going to do that now. I'm going to start with some states that I think are going to be just on the edge between being likely states and safe states. For instance, the state of Texas and its 40 electoral votes. Back in 2024, in November, Donald Trump won it over Kamala Harris 56% to 42%. Trump did much better in 2024 than he did in 2020 in the state of Texas, a 14% win. I do think if it's Vance versus Walz, I do think even though I'm not sure JD Vance will be able to get as much turnout as Donald Trump did, I do think Texas could ultimately go over 15%, very, very barely, probably like 15% on the dot. But I do think Texas would be a safe Republican state for Vance versus Walz. Actually, we do have the state of New York and its 28 electoral votes. We did see a pretty big swing here where Kamala Harris won the state over Donald Trump by 12 points. It is possible that New York continues to swing more towards the Democratic side, though I do think Donald Trump, being from the state of New York, maybe swung a few more votes than maybe Vance would. So I am going to put New York as a safe Democratic state, but that is one that maybe Republicans could feel a little bit more optimistic about. This puts Walz up at 148. The state of Illinois voted for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump, 55% to 44%. That is an 11-point win for Harris over Trump. Again, a lot of these issues are going to come down to voter turnout. I do think Tim Walz will be able to get over 15% over JD Vance. I think Walz's problem is going to be in a lot of the toss-up states. I don't think he's going to have much trouble in the traditional Democratic states. This puts Walz at 167. Vance is at 165. Now we have the state of Iowa and its 6 electoral votes. Donald Trump won here by 13 points. And this is one where I'm really on the edge between giving it safe or likely. I am going to give it safe for JD Vance, but that is one that I think is certainly going to be a Republican state in 2028, and Vance wins it here. The state of Ohio and its 17 electoral votes. Donald Trump did just defeat Kamala Harris by 11% in the state of Ohio, but in a hypothetical 2028 election of Vance versus Walz, I do think it is possible. It still could be likely, but I think JD Vance wins it by over 15%. Now we're going to look at the state of Colorado and its 10 electoral votes. Colorado did vote for Kamala Harris 54% to Donald Trump's 43%. This is one where I'm on the edge between giving Colorado a safe Democrat and likely Democrat. It was a likely Democratic margin in 2024, but I do think it might even go a little bit more Democratic and go safe for Tim Walz. Now we're starting to get into the states that are more considered the competitive states. We're going to go to New Mexico, where it's 5 electoral votes. Voted for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump, 52% to 46%, a 6% margin there. I do think that Vance will have less turnout in terms of enthusiasm among the party base than Trump did. So I do think in a state like New Mexico that it might actually hurt him enough where it stays a likely Democratic state. Walz is up to 182. Vance is at 188. Now we're going to look at the state of Florida. Florida is a state where it voted for Donald Trump by 13 points over Kamala Harris, and it's right on the edge between being a safe state and a likely state. I am going to make Florida a safe Republican state, but just very, very barely, as I do think the percentages over the next 4 years may be enough to just flip it, those 2%, but that one's close to being a likely state as well. Now I'm going to look at the state of New Jersey, where Republicans, Donald Trump did very well in 2024 in the state, only losing the seat to Kamala Harris 52% to 46%. That is still a likely Democratic margin. The Republicans say they're going to make a lot of efforts at trying to win the state across the next few years in 2026 and 2028, and obviously 2025. The governor election, for right now, though, I'm going to err on the side of caution and say New Jersey continues to be a likely Democratic state. It's no longer the safe Democratic stronghold that it once was, but I still think it's going to be in the Democratic column under 15%, but probably over 5%. The state of Maine and its 2 electoral votes for the state at large, that did go for Kamala Harris by 7 points. Tim Walz versus J.D. Vance, I don't expect too much of a different result out of Maine, and I think it will probably be a likely state once again. However, Maine's 2nd district, we did see that one go for Donald Trump by about 10 points. I think J.D. Vance will be able to win it, even if he does worse than Trump, at least by over 5 points, and I think he will win that district pretty handedly. This puts Vance at 219. Walz is at 198. And this is where things start to get interesting, because J.D. Vance has an ability to communicate very articulately, and that might be able to help him with some voters that maybe did not vote for Donald Trump in 2024. Though, again, I do think some party enthusiasm may be a little lower without Donald Trump being on the ticket. But I also think Tim Walz honestly would not perform as well as Kamala Harris did in some instances as well. So that remains to be seen. But Vance is at 219, Walz is at 198. I think the state of Virginia, we did see vote for Kamala Harris 52% to 46%. And I do think we would see it vote for Tim Walz over J.D. Vance. The question is what the margins would be. Would it be a lean Democratic state or a likely Democratic state? And I think in this scenario, I think it would go lean Democratic. I think J.D. Vance would do a better job of campaigning than Tim Walz did, and Vance would be able to pick away some suburban voters, even more than Trump did in 2024 in a state like Virginia. This puts Walz at 211, Vance at 219. The state of North Carolina, we just saw Donald Trump win the state by 3%, 51-48 over Kamala Harris in 2024. In a Vance versus Tim Walz election, I think North Carolina would still be a likely or a lean Republican state at around 4 to 4.5% margin of victory, maybe even getting over that number and going up to 5. But I think North Carolina would stay as a lean Republican state. The state of Minnesota, obviously Tim Walz's home state. We did just see Kamala Harris win here by about 4 points. It's interesting because I don't think Tim Walz is as strong of a candidate as Kamala Harris is, but I do think also being from the state of Minnesota, in Minnesota's streak of voting for Democrats, I would expect it to still go for Tim Walz over J.D. Vance. The question is, would it be a likely state at 5% or a lean state and going a little bit over that? And I'm actually going to put it very barely as a likely state. I think him being on the ticket may give a little bit of an added boost at the top of the ticket, but again, that's all subjective. Nebraska's, actually I'm going to make it lean Democratic. I think it might be a little too far. Nebraska's 2nd district, this one we did just see vote for Kamala Harris by about 5 points. I think Tim Walz, maybe he'll lose a little bit of support, but I think he'll still win it by at least a lean Democratic margin. I don't see this district going for a Republican in the near future, really, anytime soon. So Tim Walz right now is at 222. J.D. Vance is at 235. And are technically including North Carolina, this is where the swing states really start to come into play and where the election is going to be won or not. Starting in the state of Georgia, Georgia was very, very close in 2024. Donald Trump won it 51% to 49%. It's an area with a lot of rural areas of smaller numbers of votes that all add up in smaller counties, and a very big Atlanta area in Fulton County and the surrounding suburbs in it, which are growing and are showing to be more and more Democratic. However, I would still say Georgia is a swing state, but a tilt Republican leaning swing state, at least based on what 2024 showed us. So I do think J.D. Vance against Tim Walz. This is one area where I think Vance would do better, with Walz being on the top of the ticket, where I'm not sure Walz's policies and such in Minnesota as governor. Some of the issues, especially on gender and such, would appeal too well to a state like Georgia. I think that would actually hurt Walz a lot and give Vance a win here of about 3 to 4% in Georgia. Vance is at 251. Walz is at 222. The state of Arizona voted for Donald Trump over Kamala Harris by 5 points, 52% to 47%. This would actually be a likely Republican win. And I think against Tim Walz, Donald Trump has a lot of issues, especially with some of the comments he made about John McCain in the state of Arizona, and he was still able to defeat Kamala Harris by 5 points in Arizona. I think Vance, who would not have those issues at the top of the ticket, would, I think, win against Tim Walz by at least 5 points as well. Again, he would not have those issues with the McCains that Trump did, and I think Vance would do better than a typical Republican in Arizona, or do about as good as a typical Republican would. This puts Vance at 262. Walz is at 222. The state of Nevada, this is a very interesting one. Donald Trump was able to win here 51% to 47% over Kamala Harris. And this was definitely one of the more surprises of the night, where I did predict that Donald Trump would win the state of Nevada, but the 4% margin of victory certainly surprised me. This was a very big swing, about 4 to 5 point swing from the last elections. And I do think Nevada will stay Republican, but I'm not sure. It's not going to be any more than the 4 to 5% number, I don't think. I think J.D. Vance will maybe win it either in a lean Republican number or tilt Republican. I'm going to go lean Republican for now, but on the lower end of it, like I think about like 1.5% to 2%. I'm not sure if tax on tips, which was a very effective policy of the Trump campaign, would be a top issue in 2028 for Vance and his campaign team. So that could be one that is important to watch for as well. Now we get into where the election is decided in the Rust Belt: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, all 3 states that did vote for Donald Trump in 2024. The only advantage here is Tim Walz is a governor of the state of Minnesota, though J.D. Vance was the senator and now vice president from the state of Ohio. So they're both sort of battling for these homegrown stretches, and I think we saw in 2024, essentially, Walz and Vance, Trump and Harris, what this matchup ended up being, with Trump winning all 3 Rust Belt states. And I really am having a hard time seeing a pathway for Tim Walz in this election. I think the state of Pennsylvania, which I just showed you, Donald Trump won 50.4 to 48.7. I think Walz would probably lose in Pennsylvania by even maybe more than Kamala Harris did. This would put Vance at 287 and would be enough to get Vance over the 270 threshold in winning this election. Though the one thing I am questioned about is the state of Michigan. It voted for Donald Trump over Kamala Harris by 1.4%, was a big swing for Trump, and we've not seen a Republican outside of Donald Trump win the state of Michigan in a very long time, the presidential level. So Vance being Trump's VP, I'm very interested to watch, will Vance be able to do as well in Michigan as Donald Trump did? And that's where something I'm a little bit more curious about comes. I'm going to put the state of Michigan as a tilt Republican state for J.D. Vance. I think he may even do worse potentially than Donald Trump in Michigan, even though it is against Tim Walz. And Wisconsin, I'm really going back and forth on this one, where Wisconsin, Donald Trump won 49.7 to 48.8. I think J.D. Vance, he'll lose some of the Trump-only voters, but Tim Walz, I think, is going to do worse than Kamala Harris did. So I think J.D. Vance holds on here in Wisconsin very, very narrowly as well. I think Pennsylvania would be the only Rust Belt state to be over 1% margin of victory for J.D. Vance, and even that I think would be very narrow. The state of New Hampshire is an interesting one because it did just vote for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump by 3%, 51% to 48%. And if Republicans put in more effort in 2028 in the state of New Hampshire, maybe they can make it a more competitive race. And that's kind of what I expect or predict to happen. And that would have, I think Tim Walz still wins the state, but I think it gets under 1%. I think the Vance campaign would treat it more as a toss-up after 2024 was only a 3-point race. So I do have a Vance versus Walz matchup ending in the same electoral vote numbers as 2024. I think a big reason is obviously the 2024 election just happened, and that's still in the back of a lot of people's minds. I do think Vance and Walz, it'd be interesting because I don't think the voter turnout and enthusiasm would be as high. I think Vance may lose some voters that Trump got because the fact that Trump's not on the ballot, Republicans have not typically done as well. But I do think Vance being Trump's VP would be able to keep enough of the voter base where Vance would still be able to win. But like in states in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, Vance may do like a half percentage point worse than Trump did in 2024. And we're seeing some margin shifting a little bit, nothing really too significant. It would be I think Walz and Vance would be like a very safe election in terms of the trends from 2024 to 2020. I don't think we're going to see really anything too drastic of a shift in 2028 if it was Walz versus Vance. I don't think by any way this is the most likely matchup for 2028. There's no, I would say, strong indication that Walz is running in 28. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I don't think he's a very strong candidate to win the Democratic primary, even if he does run, especially after how 2024 went in his debate against Vance. So I do think Vance would win, and you could make an argument that maybe Vance would be more competitive in a state like New Hampshire or in a state like Virginia, or maybe even Walz's home state of Minnesota. But I think 312 would be where about Vance starts out. Because, again, I can't stress this enough. I think Vance, in some ways, is more popular than Trump in some areas, and in some ways would perform worse than Trump in a lot of areas. So it's going to be interesting to see what his electoral prospects would be like if he is the candidate in 2028. But I think against Tim Walz, he would probably perform the same as Trump did in 2024. I'm interested to hear what you think about this video. Leave a comment below. Tell me what your thoughts would be of a Vance versus Walz matchup. Make sure to give the video a like and click subscribe so you always get notified when I post a new video. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video. That will do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a like. And if you really liked it, please remember to click the subscribe button. And make sure you turn post notifications on so you always get notified when I post a new video. That way you never miss one. Also, please remember to share this video with your friends and family if you really like the video. And remember to stay tuned because I'll be posting at least one video every single day leading up until Election Day. So I'd really appreciate it if you keep coming back and watching those videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in a future video.